Hello, this is James Patterson, Grants Officer with the Community Foundation, and I want to take a few minutes to go over some of the items regarding our grant process and our grant application. And this isn't meant to be an exhaustive how-to, but rather just highlighting some of the things that we've found that people have had some questions about or different items that we wanted to emphasize. So let me just start by saying that the application is currently open. You can go in right now. In fact, we encourage you to go in as soon as possible. And if you haven't registered, certainly to do that right away. Sometimes there's some issues that come up with that, and it's important to have that resolved. And then once you are registered, then to go into the online application on our web portal and just take a look at the application, see what's going to be required, so that you can be prepared for that. There are some documents that may require some preparation or even approval from someone that may take a few days, but the earlier you start, the better. So the submission deadline for that application is October 2nd before 5 p.m. That's a hard deadline, so that's another good reason why it's important to get started early. And then once you've submitted your applications after October 2nd, there is about a couple of month period there where we have review process that we go through to determine who will receive grants. But you'll find out in mid to late December, if you've received a grant or not, and you will receive a notice one way or the other. So that's a little on the timeline that we have. So, and then, I've mentioned the selection process, and we have a thorough selection process that involves several layers of screening and oversight. So it begins with staff taking a look and making sure that each of the applications are eligible according to our guidelines and are complete. So it's important that those two elements are there. Then we then give them to our committees, who then have the task of making the selections. And last year we received 92 requests totaling $2.2 million. We were able to fund 54 of those requests totaling about $1.1 million. So these committees really have their work cut out for them. It's a very competitive process. These committees, they each are assigned to a specific focus area. So we have the 6 focus areas, and we have 7 committees. There's actually 2 that work in the education focus area. But they actually they go through and they score each one of these applications. They've got a 2-week process where they go through this, and they score each of these applications based on the scoring rubric that you can find on our website. And then they actually come together, we meet, and we share our thoughts on the various applications, and by the end of that meeting have selections made as to which ones will be recommended to our board for approval. Then that is the next step. So it goes to our board for approval. At that time, the board can decline any or even bring back others, but typically the board will rely on the good work of our committees who put a lot of time and effort into the review process. So there is that thorough vetting. And the other thing about the review process is that we really strive to be fair and objective with our selection process. We want it to be based on the merits of the applications that come in. So one of the things that helps us do that is that we have community involvement in all of these focus committees. There are usually a couple of our trustees that serve on those committees or more, but there are always several what we call community advisors. Just these are other people in the community that help us with our process. So there's the community involvement aspect. We also have a conflict of interest policy that's well developed to make sure that if there's someone on the committee that has an affiliation with one of the organizations, that they're not able to influence this decision-making process. They actually end up leaving the room if one of the applications come up for discussion that they have some affiliation with. So we also make sure that our committee members are basically anonymous. That way there's no undue outside influence, and that there's confidentiality too, so that what's discussed stays with the committee. And the other thing that we try to do is regarding giving advice to our grantees, we won't give advice to any grantee more than what we would give to another grantee. That's something that we really strive for, and that way everyone has the same opportunity to receive a grant from the Community Foundation. Let's go through a few items regarding the application itself. As I mentioned, all applications need to go through the online process through our web portal, and then there, you cannot use the Word version that I mentioned earlier to do that. It has to be online. And we've oftentimes been asked, well, what if I have a currently funded program and I want to have that particular program funded again? Is that possible to do? And I would say, yes, it is absolutely possible, as long as you haven't applied for or as long as you haven't received funding for that project 3 years in a row. In that case, you do need to take 2 years off for that particular program, charitable activity. But yes, you can apply for the same program. Now, the important part here is that the committees always ask in those situations, well, how is that program going now? Is it showing the results that were expected, or is it making a difference? So when you do your interim report, and I'll talk a little bit about interim reports a little later, when you do that, you'll want to be more descriptive and give more information if you are currently involved in a program that you're asking for funding again for. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing is that when we're talking about the focus areas, sometimes we get the question, which focus area should I put this or apply under? And really, you should just pick the one that you think is the closest to what you're doing. If for some reason we feel that it would be better served to have another committee in a different focus area review it, we'll move that. So you don't need to worry too much about that. Just pick the one that you think makes the most sense. And another area here that is new on the application is the demographics section. Let me just show you what that looks like. Yeah, here it is. What we've done is we have hopefully developed a more precise way of indicating who is being served. So we've split each one of these demographic areas into ranges and asked you to estimate the number of people served within each range. So the key word here is estimate. We realize that in most cases it's impossible to predict, how many people are going to be in each of these areas. But it will give us a pretty good idea if you estimate that. And then later in the final report, we'll ask for actual numbers. So that's a new section that you'll want to be aware of. And then another question that comes up a lot has to do with the attachments. Sometimes people will have attachments that are larger than the 5 megabyte limit that we have on the application. We also require that they be PDFs, so sometimes we'll get questions about what kind of documents can you upload. Well, in most cases, they're going to be PDFs, and they're going to be under 5 megabytes. There are some places where we ask for pictures, and those would be picture files, and that will work fine. But sometimes people have files that are larger than 5 megabytes, and they, not sure how to get them to be smaller. Well, we do have a document on our website that talks about how to use Primo PDF to reduce the size of your PDF document. So you can look for that, and it will show you how to do that. Another question that comes up is sometimes you need to combine documents to upload in one particular field on the grant application. And sometimes people aren't sure how to do that. Well, the nice thing is that Primo PDF, which is free software, by the way, has a function to do that. So that document that's on our website will be helpful to you if you run into any of those issues. So I'd like to bring that up. Okay, just a few comments about reporting. If you receive a grant from the Community Foundation, you will be required to do some reporting. Everyone who receives a grant will be required to complete a final report. This is due approximately 14 months after the grant is awarded. It's completed online, and it will directly correlate to the results section of your application. We strongly encourage you to review the report form once you have been notified that you have received a grant. It will be important for you to begin tracking the indicators of your results and your demographics right from the very beginning. Now, those of you who receive a multi-year grant will need to complete one or more progress reports. These reports are identical to the final report, but need to be submitted at the end of each year of funding. So subsequent years of funding are contingent upon the submission of the report and CFNIL's approval. So that's the progress report. Now, there's another type of report called the interim report that sometimes gets confused with the progress report. But what the progress report is a brief update on the status of an open CFNIL grant. They need only be submitted if you are applying for a new grant prior to submitting the final report for an open grant. So if you have an open grant and haven't submitted the final report, perhaps it's not due yet, perhaps you've had an extension, whatever that may be. So the format for the interim report can be found on our website. It is brief. It's just an update, but they do need to be submitted prior to the deadline for the grant cycle that's of concern. So that's a little bit about our reporting, and also sometimes as a grantee, you will need to request, or you'll need to change the implementation of your project. Perhaps you have new major partners, or you need to spend the funds in a significantly different way than you originally proposed. When that's the case, and when you apply, you agree to implement the project as described in your grant application. So when this is the case, you'll need to request a grant amendment. These are fairly straightforward requests. They can be submitted by email and simply describe the necessary change and the rationale for that change. The main criteria that we use to determine whether or not the request will be granted is, how closely the implementation mirrors the original purpose of the program, because that's what was originally recommended and approved by our board of directors. So that's a